In regard to the interest one has in that which occurs in the world, one can take two standpoints: the standpoint of the son of the earth and that of the world citizen. From the first one, nothing interests except affairs and what is related to things insofar as they have an influence on our welfare. From the second one, humanity, the whole of the world, the origin of things, their inner worth, the final purposes, interest at least enough to make judgments about them with inclination. The standpoint of the son of the earth leads us to our most immediate duty, but one mustn't be stuck to it. It makes an active, upright man, yet still of narrow heart and outlooks. In company, especially in friendship, one has to extend one's attitudes. The son of the earth does not have enough content within himself. He is stuck to the people and things which occupy him. Jurists seldom also love geography or politics. Courtiers are sons of the earth. World citizen has to regard the world as inhabitant and not as stranger. Not be world onlooker, but world citizen. Often one is a son of the earth because the concepts, often because the heart is too limited. Immanuel Kant. Previously, I discussed what patriotism means to Kant. It does not mean nationalism, it does not mean chauvinism. It means serving your state, even sacrificing yourself for your state if you must, but only for justice, only for the state insofar as it is an instrument of justice, only serving the rule of law, only serving a just constitution. And this patriotism, not nationalism, of course, but this patriotism, a patriotism, Kant says, that is built on principles, must necessarily lead also to an attitude of cosmopolitanism, because you cannot want justice just in your state. If other states around are unjust, they might attack you and they might defeat you and they might subjugate you and oppress you, and then your justice is gone. So if you want the justice to have permanence, it must be global. There must be justice for everyone. Now, to Kant, cosmopolitanism is important. It's a word that often reappears in his writings. And when he uses this word, usually he is referring to an attitude where a person is more than just his individual particularity. If you view yourself and if you have interests just as you, this individual, or maybe a citizen of this particular state, or maybe a part of this particular class, you are not a world citizen. You are not cosmopolitan. But if you view yourself and your interests as a human being as such, as a rational being as such, then you are being a world citizen. Then you are being cosmopolitan. So this is true for first for more theoretical interests. So a cosmopolitan attitude to Kant would mean just being interested in the world at large, right? So, for example, he was very interested, living in the 18th century, in a time where there was still exploration going on, where still not all the world was mapped or known. He was very interested in geography. in his free time, he would read lots of journals from European travelers that had traveled to other continents, that had sailed around the earth, and he was interested in how are other lands shaped, what types of animals and plants are there, and what types of peoples are there. How do they live? What kinds of cultures do they have? And this he used to read about. This was also the main topic of conversation at his daily tables when he met with his acquaintance to dine together. Um, he would not like to discuss deep philosophical, metaphysical matters at the table, but rather he would always talk about, oh, have you heard the newest discoveries of, I don't know, new islands in the Pacific, or have you heard that the Chinese do this or that? Um, and he would also, and this I will get to when I talk about what he had to say about natural science, he would also regularly hold lectures on physical geography, as he called it, to share this knowledge of the world with his students. And this is done from a cosmopolitan attitude, Kant would say. Because if you don't have that attitude, then as someone living in 18th century Prussia and Königsberg, you could easily say, oh, why would I care about China? Just like I don't care about the moon or about other galaxies. What is it to me? And because it has no direct influence on my life, right? Or it has nothing to do with my job, with my profession. This is something that Kant especially talks about, and like people that are only focused on their profession. For example, he says many lawyers, they only care about what has to do with the law, and also only with the law in this state, not the law of reason, not justice as it should be, but rather they only care about their own profession, right? And this means a certain close-mindedness or a certain narrow-mindedness, or maybe also a certain provincialism. If you say I only care about what has directly to do with my life, with my profession, or with the place where I live, and if you say I don't care about geography and far off cultures, or also if you say I don't care about history and what happened in the past. I mean, um, we all may have different interests that we focus on specifically. Um, and one human lifetime is, of course, way too little to know everything, to read everything. So it's fine if you don't focus on everything. But still, you should generally have an open mind and generally be interested. Like, I might not spend all my free time reading historians' works on specifically the history of the Inca, or reading biologists' works about the plants that grow on Borneo. But if in a regular conversation, if I somehow met a person, an acquaintance who was knowledgeable about these things, and who were to say, oh, did you know that on Borneo there's this and that tree that has this specific characteristic, or actually the Incas, they had this interesting, I don't know, writing system or whatever, then I would not immediately shut off and be like, oh, don't tell me that, I don't care, that has nothing to do with my life. But rather, I would listen with an open mind and with a general interest towards the world, right? And so this already is what it means to Kant to be a cosmopolitan. But then when you go beyond what you are simply interested in, or what you like to learn and to hear about, when it comes to the more practical, right? What you actually want, what you actually do, then being cosmopolitan to Kant means having an interest in humankind as such. Again, not just caring for the benefit of yourself or your own nation or your own class, but rather taking the perspective of a human being as such, who says, as one of Kant's favorite Latin quotes go, I'm a human, therefore nothing human is alien to me, right? So, taking an interest in the progress of the human species, in the benefit of the human species. And to Kant, the one thing that truly concerns us all, that truly matters for us all, is perpetual peace. So, true world peace. And I will, in the upcoming lectures, I will talk more about this. But to Kant, peace is not just ceasefire, because even if no one was fighting wars against one another right now, theoretically wars could break out again. So true peace needs to be a state where war cannot even break out again, where peace is enforced. So it needs to be a condition of justice, of the rule of law, not just within a nation, but between the nations. So if you are a world citizen, if you care about humankind as such, what you will care about beyond everything else is justice. And this is how Kant uses the word cosmopolitanism. So, for example, when he speaks of writing a cosmopolitan history, and there's, for example, a small essay of his where he proposes that, which is titled History in a Cosmopolitan Regard. Then what he means is writing a history that does not focus on anything particular or on anything that is only of particular interest, only for the people involved. Like, for example, writing the history of a specific state's borders and how they expanded because it won some wars, or writing the history of a specific dynasty and how these monarchs ruled. I mean, that's probably of interest to those monarchs. They want their dynasty to rule and to keep ruling, but it's not of interest to humankind as such. What humankind as such is interested in is justice. So Kant says, if you were to write a cosmopolitan history, you would focus only on those events that contributed to the progress of justice, right? Like in Kant's time, the French Revolution, which had effects far beyond France. And this is what having a cosmopolitan attitude means, caring about justice. So maybe you could say, I mean, being a cosmopolitan means being a world citizen, right? Cosmos is the world, and polis was the Greek city-state. So the world is your polis, you are a citizen of the world. This is indeed also the German word. In German, we say Weltbürger, literally world citizen. And you could maybe here think of Hannah Arendt and of her concept of world and worldliness, right? Because to Arendt, world is not so much a synonym for nature or for the universe, as we might use the word world, but rather to her, world is mainly the human world, the world that humans create, the human artifice, as she says. So, for example, our architecture, our buildings, or our artworks, our shared literature, or whatever. And this world she also calls the between, because it literally is between us and connects us as human beings, and not just us who are alive right now, but it even connects us with the past and with the future, because this world has a certain permanence and may exist for longer than we do, right? Like, we still to some degree inhabit the same world as the ancient Egyptians, because after 4,000 years the pyramids are still standing. So that world they built existed for much longer than they themselves. And to Arendt, politics is specifically about the world in this sense, about together shaping this world and caring for this world. And Arendt too would say, and this fits with Kant, that as long as you are this or that particular individual with your particular selfish interests, you will not care for the world, and therefore you will not be political. So she uses at one point this example of a house, and there is someone living in the house, renting the house or renting an apartment, and there's the landlord. And both, as such, in these roles, don't care for the house, Arendt says. So the tenant, as a tenant, of course, wants to pay as little rent as possible. But if he pays only very little rent, the landlord will not have the money for renovations. He cannot care for the house. So with time, the house will start falling apart. Now, someone could argue that it would be in the rational self-interest of the tenant, if he's not just thinking short-term, but a bit more long-term, to want to pay a little higher rent so that the house can be cared for. But here Arendt says this is not true, because if the house starts falling apart, he could just move out to another house and then pay very low rent again for some years till it falls apart again, and so on, and be a sort of nomad. Or also, eventually he will die anyways. So what does he care if the house falls apart after he is dead? That's the next tenant's problem, but not his. And likewise, she says, the landlord, as a landlord, of course, wants to receive a very high rent, but he wants to take the money for himself. He does not want to reinvest the money into caring for the house and renovating the house. And here too, one might argue, but wouldn't it be in his rational self-interest to keep the house intact so that he can keep renting it out? But again, Arendt would say, well, he can just sell it to somebody else after some years. So before it has started falling apart, so when it is still worth something, and then the fact that it hasn't been renovated for a while is the new owner's, the new landlord's problem, and not his. And also he too will eventually die. So even if he does not sell the house, it's not his problem if it turns into ruin in 100 years. He will not be around in 100 years. He wants to collect his rent now. So both parties, as these specific people, have an interest in saving money or in making money. They don't have an interest in the house as such and in investing money into the house. Only if they go beyond their self-interest, only if they act as human beings as such, not as tenant, not as landlord, but just as a human being who cares for the human artifice, the house, and who wants to pass on the house to the next generation of human beings, only then might they come together and talk about the money that needs to be invested in the house and how to invest it. And this would be politics, shaping their shared world, their house. So you could say that with Arendt, going back to Kant, you are a world citizen if you care for the world, this between, this shared house of ours, and the justice in the world, even beyond your place in the world and even beyond your finite life in this world. And this cosmopolitan sense, of course, is something that unfortunately many people are lacking. So many people will not care about justice in general. They may care about their own country. They may care about what affects them directly. But if you tell them there's an injustice somewhere else, maybe they could affect it. Like maybe they could boycott that other unjust, despotic country. But they will say, oh, why should I care for that? Or why should I sacrifice myself for that? And even in situations when nothing is even asked of you, no sacrifice, no action, not even a boycott or something, even just talking about it, right? Like some years ago when there were these big protests in Iran after a woman was murdered because she did not veil herself. I saw such conversations online. There were people saying, oh, why should I care? And others didn't say, do something like go to Iran, support the protesters. They were just saying, oh, hopefully the regime falls, hopefully the women and the people in general gain their freedom. And somebody just said, I don't care. And this, of course, means I'm not a human being. I am just a German, maybe, or I'm just a member of this class or citizen of this country, but I don't care. And this is not cosmopolitan. On the other hand, if you do care, like take in recent times the Palestine protesters, they could, of course, have a much easier life not protesting for Palestine, not getting cancelled, not getting in trouble, not getting, in some cases, arrested as terrorists, right? They could just say, I don't care. Okay, sure, it's a genocide, but it's not a genocide against me and my people. So what is it to me? But they are clearly people with a cosmopolitan attitude who say, well, I care about justice as such, no matter whether it affects me directly or not. And of course, once again, as a true patriot who cares about justice in his country, you should be a cosmopolitan. There can, of course, be an argument that can be made that even out of self-interest, you should care for a just world. You should not want the global law-based world order to break down, because this might eventually also hurt us. But that aside, the cosmopolitan will not even ask, might this come back to bite me in the ass? Might this affect me directly? He just cares about justice in general. And this cosmopolitan attitude, as I already said, it is about taking the perspective of a human being as such. So therefore, Kant says, as a citizen, insofar as you are only a citizen of your state, you can be a patriot, but you cannot be cosmopolitan. You can be cosmopolitan only where you are more than just a citizen of your state, only where you are a human being. And for that reason, it is especially two classes or two groups of people from whom Kant demands and expects cosmopolitanism. And that is the scholars and the rulers. So first of the scholars, the scientists, also the philosophers, they should have a cosmopolitan attitude. Maybe not as citizens in their daily lives, right? As a citizen, for example, I'm paying taxes to my state, not to some other states. I'm following the laws of my state, not of other states. But insofar as I'm a scholar, as I'm engaged in scholarship, I'm not acting as a citizen of this or that state, right? It doesn't matter if I'm, let's say, a physicist or a mediciner or a historian, um, or a sociologist or whatever in Germany or in the United States or in Brazil or in Kenya or whatever. Truth is always the same. And I should just seek truth. So I should just act as a human being or as a rational being as such. And I should try to spread truth if I find something. I should publish my discoveries and share them with the public, at least with the learned public. Like the broader public might not care, but with my fellow scholars. And I won't share just with the scholars of my country. I will publicize it in general so scholars all around the world can benefit from my discoveries and can build on them. And so I contribute to the progress not just of my country, but of humankind as such. So, in Kant's day in the 18th century, people would talk about the Republic of Letters, which is like this imagined invisible state or invisible community that transcends the national states, the states in the juridical sense, and includes all the world. And that is the state of scholars, the state of the learned man, right? Called the state of letters because it was constituted through writing, right? Through the letters they would send one another or through the books they would publish, and called a republic because, well, this state was not a monarchy, there was not one absolute ruler, but everyone was equal in this republic. Nowadays, we don't speak of the Republic of Letters anymore, but we speak of, for example, the scientific community. So you, as a scholar, as a scientist, you are part of a global community that works for the progress of humankind as such, not of a specific group or a specific state. Of course, there can be scholarly or scientific work that is not done in a cosmopolitan sense, like that is made to benefit only specific groups, like a specific company, right? Researchers that, let's say, work for a specific pharmacy company or whatever, or a specific tech company. Or maybe researchers that work for a specific state, right? Like, for example, in military technology, trying to come up with some new weapons like the nuclear bomb only for your state. I mean, even in this case, history shows that eventually those inventions or those discoveries will probably spread. You cannot just keep them to yourself forever. But still, the attitude of this researcher, of this scholar, who is not serving the whole, but just his company or just the state, is not a cosmopolitan one. But therefore, this is also not the attitude of a true scholar, because a true scholar, according to Kant, would serve humankind and not particular financial or political or whatever interests. And as I said in a previous lecture on the freedom to talk, the freedom of speech, to Kant, this is precisely what freedom of speech should be for these people, for the scholars, for the scientists with a cosmopolitan attitude, so that they can spread their discoveries, their truths, so that there can be made progress. Freedom of speech is not so that you can say any random, stupid, unreflected opinion, but rather the true sense of freedom of speech, why it is important, is so that truth can be spread, and so that there can be progress, and so that people have the ability. Of course, Kant does here, he does not mean scholar in a professional sense. Like, you don't have to be a professor at a university. Everyone can act as a scholar in their free time. Even if you have another day job, you can also be, so to say, a non-academic. You can be, so to say, an amateur scholar who still contributes something. But the point is your attitude. The point is that you speak publicly not as yourself, out of your particularity, out of your limited perspective, but you speak from the perspective of reason itself. You speak about truth as such. So the scholars should be cosmopolitan, but then also the rulers, the heads of state, should be, Kant says. Because the regular citizen, he first of all needs to be a patriot, not so much a cosmopolitan, because directly he is only in contact with other citizens of the same state, and directly he is only in contact with the state as a whole. But he does not have direct, immediate contact with people in other nations or on other continents. Of course, this was even more true in Kant's day, when there was not so much tourism, and when, I mean, there already was a quite developed global economy, but not nearly as developed, of course, as today. But Kant says the ruler, the head of state, he is not just in contact with his own state and with his own citizens, but rather he is dealing with other states, with other nations too. And that's why he should not just be guided by a selfish perspective, asking what is best for my state, maybe even if it is unjust, right? Like, maybe I'm attacking other states or other nations, maybe I'm conquering them, colonizing them, maybe I'm ethnically cleansing or genociding them even, but it might benefit our power, our wealth, it might gain us land or resources or whatever. That would, of course, be unjust. That would, of course, be done from a limited perspective, in maybe the short-term interest of this state, of this nation, but not in a cosmopolitan perspective. No, Kant says, the proper ruler would be a cosmopolitan, and in his international politics, in the way he deals with others, he would ask not just what benefits my state, but what contributes to the progress towards justice of the whole. Like, in our days, for example, when South Africa took Israel to court for genocide, maybe that was not so much in the direct benefit of South Africa. I mean, maybe South Africa could benefit more, like economically, by kissing the ass of the US and serving the Western Bloc, and therefore not attacking the US's favorite ally. but it is maybe making a sacrifice, risking economic sanctions and so on, in order to further the justice of the whole, to further the rule of law in the world. Likewise, the countries like Colombia or so that formed the Hague Group, saying we want to serve the International Criminal Court in The Hague. We want to uphold international law. We want to enforce the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. We want to not allow weapon shipments to Israel. That's probably, in a short-term perspective, taking some harm on themselves, on their economies, and so on, but in the interest of humankind as such. However, I want to stress that Kant is not naive. Kant does not confuse his ideal with reality. So he says the rulers should be world citizens. They should rule with a cosmopolitan attitude. He is not saying that they are doing that. Quite the contrary, he actually says that so far there has not been a single ruler who did not just care about making his nation more powerful or furthering the power, the rulership of his dynasty, but rather who was acting in a cosmopolitan manner. This is important. Not a single one. So even rulers that might have ruled their own states well might have governed them in a more republican and not so much despotic manner. It's not to say that they have dealt well with other states. So, for example, I said Kant applauds the Prussian king, Frederick II, Frederick the Great, because while, of course, technically he was an absolute monarch with despotic powers, Kant says he lifted censorship, particularly on matters of religion, and this was a Republican act. This was him governing, even though he didn't have to, in a Republican manner, because this allowed people, once again, the scholars, to freely discuss these matters, to freely criticize errors or prejudices or superstitions, and therefore to slowly aufklär the people and to slowly contribute to the progress of truth. But Kant was, of course, under no illusion. Despite this somewhat republican government, despite lifting up censorship within Prussia, when it came to, let's say, international relations, Frederick the Great, of course, still engaged in ruthless power politics, right? If you look at the 7 Years' War, the one that Americans would call the French-Indian War because they are a bit self-centered. It, of course, did not just happen in America, and it, of course, did not just involve French or Indians. Rather, it was the 7 Years' War. There also was a European theater with the British, the Prussians, the Austrians, the Muscovites. It was very much a proto-World War, you could say. Like in the 7 Years' War or in the Silesian Wars, Frederick the Great ruthlessly tried to conquer other territories and expand Prussia's power. So there was nothing cosmopolitan about that. And this is Kant's judgment of the rulers of his time, but I think if we were to live today and see the presidents or prime ministers or chancellors or whatever they are called that we have nowadays, his judgment would not change very much. they usually do not have a cosmopolitan attitude, but rather care only about their own country. I mean, I said it before, Trump is simply being more honest than previous presidents when he says America first. But of course, previous presidents have also done a politics of America first, not the world first, not humanity first, not justice first. And of course, the same can be said about other countries. I mean, we here in Europe, even within Europe, the countries are trying to one up another and to benefit at the costs of others. And of course, Europe as a whole, if you look at Europe's neo-colonial politics towards Africa, for example, um, Europe does not try to contribute to a better, to a more just world, but to contribute to its own benefit, to its own economy. So, in fairness to those current politicians of ours, this is what their citizens, this is what their voters want, right? Like I can definitely tell you here from the German perspective, people are constantly saying we need to be pragmatic. They're constantly complaining about alleged moralism that guides our politics. I would like whom they are talking about, so I could vote for that person because I don't see any moralism guiding any of our party's politics, but people sure say so. So if a politician were to say, okay, I will not put Germany's interest, Germany's economy first, rather I will serve global justice, that person would not get very many votes. But anyways, this is what the cosmopolitan attitude means to Kant, and this was very important to him. And I also want to stress that in the light of certain misinterpretations and abuses, because the Nazis, of course, abused pretty much any great German name, like any great German thinker or artist or whoever. The Nazis didn't leave their dirty fingers off them. So this includes, of course, Kant to some degree. Like, it's not that they would actually engage with his philosophy, but of course they would say, oh, Germany, such a great nation, we had great thinkers like Kant. And then on the other hand, there have been people since the end of the Nazi time, there have been some people that would criticize Kant, saying that his morality, claiming it's a bourgeois morality, that it is all about duty, that this directly led to the Nazis, and to someone like Eichmann saying, I just did my duty, I just followed orders. Of course, this is a gross misunderstanding of Kant, because here duty is not an arbitrary concept. Duty is not following whoever happens to be in charge and happens to claim following him is your duty, but rather duty is following yourself, following your own reason. Indeed, Arendt, for that reason, said when it comes to Kant, what he's actually saying is no one has a right to obey, because you are your own lawgiver. You have to lead yourself. You have no right to just follow orders. But still, there are these criticisms sometimes, and there is this abuse by the Nazis, who abused every great German, except those like Heinrich Heine or like Kurt Tucholsky, who also at the same time happened to be great Jews. So that's also why I want to make clear, in Kant there's absolutely no nationalism or chauvinism of that kind. This goes so far that, for example, during the aforementioned 7 Years' War, his city, Königsberg, was conquered by Muscovy for a time. And not only did Kant accept this, not join some sort of resistance, he was still a magister at the time, and he applied for a professorship with the Moscovian Empress, Elizabeth. He didn't get it. He had to apply later when Königsberg had been reconquered by Prussia, and when Frederick II was the ruler again. But he did apply. And as a funny anecdote, the actual narrow-minded, non-cosmopolitan nationalists, they know that Kant is not one of theirs. Because some years ago, there was a vote in former Königsberg, which is now called Kaliningrad, right, having been conquered by the Soviets in the Second World War, on what to name their airport. And one option was to name it after Immanuel Kant, and one option was to name it after some Moscovian general. In the end, the general won out, which I actually think is a good thing. I mean, I would not really name airports after philosophers in general, especially in the time of the climate crisis when we should build maybe less airports and not more. But I mean, especially in that city, I mean, it has no claim to Kant at this point. This really is not Königsberg. This really is Kaliningrad. It is a different city. It may happen to be in the same place and we use some of the same buildings, but I mean, there's no connection. There has been a historical break. All the German citizens have been driven out. Other people, Moscovians, have been settled there. And this state, this Muscovy that exists nowadays, certainly has no connection to Kant and no claim to Kant. So why would they name it after him? So I'm actually in favor of naming it after a general. But the point is that during the time when they had this vote, there was a current Moscovian general who would give a speech and agitate against Kant and tell people not to vote to name the airport after Kant. And he was saying, oh, Kant, nobody understands his writings anyways, they are too complicated. And also he was a coward and a traitor who, when his city was conquered, begged our empress to employ him. I mean, of course, Kant did not beg. It was a completely normal application as you would send at the time. It was normal to formally address it to the ruler. Of course, it would be read by some underlings, by some bureaucrats, but you would still address it to the ruler. But basically, my point is that the nationalists, because of course, the ruling elite in Muscovy right now, Putin and his generals, they want to promote nationalism as an attitude, not cosmopolitanism. They are attacking Kant precisely for his cosmopolitanism. But of course, the attitude of Kant is not even specific to him. It's just the attitude of a philosopher in general, right? I mean, the very term comes from philosophy. Allegedly, it originated with Diogenes, the ancient Cynic philosopher who, of course, lived in a time. The Greeks didn't have surnames yet, but it was very important where you came from, which polis, which city you belong to. So that's why we have all these names where they are described with their cities, right? Like Sales of Milet or Pythagoras of Abdera, or Zenon of Crition, or also Diogenes of Sinope. And he allegedly, when he was being asked, well, what polis do you belong to? He was the one to say, I am a cosmopolitan, so the world is my city, is my state. A philosopher is dealing with the supersensual. A philosopher is, as Nietzsche said, untimely. He does not belong to his age and the prejudices of his age. And you can say he's a cosmopolitan. He does not belong to a specific place where he happened to live or to be born. He, more than anyone else, has to think as a human, as a rational being, and not as this or that particular person. And Kant was very much for a cosmopolitan attitude, caring for the best, the common good of humanity, and very much against narrow nationalism. So he says, for example, patriotism is only a narrow concept and not an extended one. Therefore, some, especially the Swiss, were wrong to declare against taking up a cosmopolitan attitude and looking always for the best for the world, and not so much for the best for the country in which one lives. They praised patriotism very highly, even if it was connected with the demise of other people and states. But the interest that a person takes in the best for the world is to be preferred before what's best for oneself or for one's country. For through the universal best for the world, the private best for each state is determined most securely. And I find it important to stress that nowadays in our world where Moscow with its war against Ukraine, or the US with Trump's America First, or Israel, where people are openly saying we don't have to submit to the UN or to international law or to any charter of human rights. The world does not tell us how to defend ourselves, are all very clearly not thinking in cosmopolitan terms, but in narrow national terms. And in this context, I also want to stress that Kant is not for having pride in one's nation. I mean, I've said in previous lectures, why would you have pride in something that's not you, that has not been done by you, that's pathetic anyways? The only pride to Kant that you should have is not pride in or of something, but rather pride as such, because you are a human being, you are a rational being, you have a certain dignity. You should have your pride. You should not do certain things that are undignified. But any other sort of pride in something, according to Kant, only makes sense if others are worse than you. So he says this kind of pride can only be if there's a difference of rank, right? So, for example, the nobleman can feel proud of his nobility because he looks down on the peasant. Of course, also the non-noble can maybe have a certain pride, even against the nobleman, but then again, it is because he feels that he's actually better, right? In Kant's day in the 18th century, when the middle class, the bourgeois class was rising up, there were such people that said, oh, those nobles, what they have is only based on their birth. What I actually worked for myself. They are old-fashioned and prejudiced, and they are uneducated. We in our class, we actually have education, we actually read, we actually study, and also those nobles, they are not decent people. They have their mistresses, for example. They live in luxury. They have their big parties, while we are good, proper, pious Christians living honest lives, working hard. So this, of course, was their own kind of pride that they developed. But you can clearly see, while the reasoning might be different, it still comes down to saying we are proud of our selves, of our stages, because others are worse than us, because we in some way are better than others. So Kant would say there can be no nationalism without chauvinism or racism. You will have people claiming that. You will have people nowadays saying, oh, to me, patriotism, and of course they don't mean real patriotism, they don't mean what I talked about previously, what Kant identifies with this term, but they mean nationalism. To me, it means loving my country. It doesn't mean that I hate other countries. But you cannot claim to be proud in your country unless you say my country is better than others. I mean, why would I be proud of being a German and not a Pole or a Frenchman unless I think that Germany is somehow better than Poland or France? So this national pride, Kant is completely against. And I also want to stress this cosmopolitan attitude of Kant's, not just in general, but also specifically uh, in regards to Germany. Because not only does Kant say no one should be a nationalist, and we should all have a more cosmopolitan posture, but he also says nowhere would this narrow minded nationalism be more out of place than in Germany. Kant sometimes, like in his anthropological writings and lectures, talks about the characters of nations. That was something that you still did in the 18th century. There was still it was still commonly held that specific nations had specific characteristics, and he would discuss the characters of various nations. And Kant is very even-handed here. I mean, at least within Europe, it's a different matter, but he has to say about people outside of Europe that I will discuss when I come to Kant's works on natural science. That I will discuss the accusations of racism that you hear nowadays when I get to Kant's concept of race. But within Europe, it's not that Kant just says one nation is better than the other. He discusses them rather evenly and fairly, mostly saying they have their good sides, they have their bad sides. So Kant says that other European nations have many merits as compared to the Germans. But it's interesting that he says the merit that the Germans have is precisely that they lack pride in their country, that they lack nationalism, that they don't care as much about their fatherland as other European nations. And this to him is a sign of Aufklärung, so of enlightenment. He calls Germany the country of world citizens, the country of cosmopolitans. He says that the Germans are more humble about their country. They are more willing to look at what others are doing and to acknowledge others' advantages and others' merits. He does also say that this good attribute of the Germans can also turn into a bad one, because they might even go so far as to be a bit too humble and to not see their own merits and their own accomplishments, and to value others' merits higher than their own, and then lose themselves, lose their originality or their culture in that, right? Like, for example, in his time in the 18th century, many Germans were obsessed with France, with French culture, right? At the German courts, the German princes, the German nobles would talk French with one another, not German. And also, some people would maybe prefer the French literature, say that it has more taste, that it has a better style, that the French language is more beautiful. And people would try to copy the French fashions, the French manners, right? And this is maybe something that Kant observed in his day that you can still observe nowadays. I mean, nowadays Germans are not so focused on France anymore. nowadays the cultural hegemon is, of course, the United States. So they're much more focused on Hollywood movies, on Netflix movies, on American pop culture. Um, but just like back then, the language would be full of French loan words. Now it's full of English loan words. I mean, if you listen to the slang language, if you listen to the language of the youth, um, I mean, I sometimes read comments in the internet that, and I'm not exaggerating here, are more English than German, because they include so many English words. Like people will say, cool, of course, has been said for decades, but now they will say legit, or they will say low key, or whatever. All these use words that, of course, they picked up from the internet. So Kant says there's this tendency of Germans to value other nations or other cultures higher than their own. And he does say that on the positive side, Germans are maybe less arrogant, maybe more humble about their own nation. Um, so it's not like the French thinking of themselves as la grande nation, or as the narrow-minded English John Bull, who looks down on the continent and the peoples there on the continent. Like the French in the 18th century, they might say, oh, we are the most civilized people of Europe. We have the highest culture, we have the best manners, the best cuisine, the best literature, the best taste. Everybody else, like those Germans, those English, they are basically half barbarians still. And the English, on the other hand, they might look down on the continental nations and say, oh, we have the most liberty, right? Like since our revolution of 1688, or maybe even dating back to the Middle Ages with the Magna Carta, we have certain political rights. We don't have an absolute monarch ruling with despotic power. We have our parliament. An Englishman can go upright, doesn't have to bow to anyone. Of course, this only goes for an English gentleman, right? This does not go for the working class or for the peasants or for the colonial subjects. And they might also say, oh, we have our maritime empire. We are engaged in global trade. We have this world-spanning empire. And these people on the continent, they are basically slaves of their despots. So Kant says other nations at the time were thinking much more highly of themselves, while the Germans tended to have a more cosmopolitan attitude. He also says at some point that when an Englishman or a Frenchman travel, then they only travel to despise everyone and everything. So they basically just go around and will just say, oh, everything here is worse than at home. The manners, the food, the education, the tastes. It's not like home. So they will look down on everyone. While Kant says when a German travels, he does it to really get to know the world and to expand his horizon and to educate himself. And here, of course, you can think of the great German travelers of the 18th century. Like, surely the most prominent would be Humboldt. But for example, I would think of people like Georg Forster, or like the also poet Adalbert Chamisso, who both sailed on ships around the world, taking part in this age of discovery, both working as ethnologists and also as biologists, discovering new species, discovering various cultures. This is the cosmopolitan attitude that Kant has in mind. Germany, of course, is also located in the middle of Europe and has much less clear natural borders than, let's say, England or Spain or Italy. And also, in Kant's days, of course, there was no unified Germany. I mean, there was this very, very loose unity of the Holy Roman Empire, but it was made up of various different states, city-states, kingdoms, principalities, dukedoms, whatever. And this, together with this character, this cosmopolitan attitude, Kant says, makes the Germans the natural mediator of the people, of the European peoples, because influences from all sides can flow into Germany and can come together there. And because Germans, he would say, are more open than other peoples to influences from elsewhere. And this allows them to take up the ideas, the innovations, the discoveries from elsewhere, and to then work with them. And apart from their cosmopolitan attitude, the special character and the special merit of the Germans to Kant is their methodical thinking and their thoroughness, which precisely allows them to take up ideas from elsewhere and then to think them through and to build on them. So he would say, and I've said it before, for example, in my lecture on the genius in art, that the Germans might be less original than others. Like he says, the English are the most have the most genius, and genius to him is original spirit. So he says, if you read English literature like Hume, like Shaftesbury, like Swift, then it will be full of original ideas that maybe you haven't come up with yourself before. But often these ideas will just be scattered there and they will not be thought through to the end. So while Germans may be less original, they, through their specific character, have this ability to take up original ideas from elsewhere and to really think them through. And of course, you can point to parts of German history, like the Reformation, of course, happened in Germany with Luther, but of course through influences taken from the outside. And likewise in Kant's own day, in the 18th century, you have Aufklärung, which specifically happened in Germany. There's still this concept that it was a Europe-wide movement, but that is only by people who don't fully understand what Aufklärung in the deeper, more radical sense means, which is also one reason I don't like using the English word enlightenment, because it's not the same. And I'm not the first one to point this out. Foucault, who as a Frenchman is maybe not suspected of German nationalism, has pointed this out before me, that Aufklärung was a specifically German thing. But of course, it was possible in Germany because they took up influences from French thinkers like Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, or from English thinkers. And we can see that with Kant himself, right? Who was very much influenced in his practical thinking and anthropological thinking by Rousseau, and in his theoretical thinking by Hume. Famously, he said that it was Hume who first woke him from his dogmatic slumber. So it was Hume's discovery, Hume's genius, original insight that causality is not something we experience, and therefore it cannot be something we simply learned from an experience, that Hume himself did not think through to the end, But Kant did, thereby arriving at his transcendental idealism, thereby coming to the conclusion that causality must be a concept of our own intellect that we don't take from experience, but rather that is a condition of the possibility of making experience in the first place. I further discussed this in my lecture on transcendental idealism if you want to understand this better. Of course, often it is precisely your strength that can also be a weakness. So Kant would say this character of the Germans can also have the downside that they can lose themselves, or that they can, because they have so little originality, they can live with the spirit of copying. Just, yeah, copying what others do, the way others sings, the fashions of others, and that therefore they can, of course, also be characterless and unprincipled, changing themselves with the fashions, always orienting themselves on what others are doing currently. And this is, of course, something that was true in his time, but that once again you can observe nowadays. Again, nowadays Germany is mainly oriented on the US, and this goes for culture. I mean, we basically have no culture of our own. For example, there basically is no German cinema. I mean, there are lots of police crime dramas being produced, and some local kitsch love dramas like The Mountain Doctor, some physician in the Alps and the mountains dealing with family drama and love and bullshit. But apart from that, there's nothing that really matters or is of any quality or has any cultural impact, not just beyond German, but even within Germany itself. No, rather we watch Netflix or we watch Hollywood movies. And or likewise, there's no German video game industry to speak of, for example. Rather, Germans will play American video games, or video games from other countries, like other European countries, even. It's not about how big you are, right? Even small countries like Poland or like the Czechs, they have their own video game industry that creates internationally acclaimed titles like The Witcher or like Kingdom Come. But Germany, I mean, maybe we used to have some decades ago, but it has mostly died out. So culturally, we are very oriented on the US, but also politically. I mean, um, German politics, and this is equally true for the left and for the right. Um, it's not really for for a large part. It's not so much rooted in our own history, or let's say our own essence and our own issues, but rather for a large part they are just looking at what the Americans are doing and just copying it down to the very terms, um, often not even translating the terms, um, just taking the English terms into Germany, and taking the discourse, taking the issues that are being discussed, even though they might be very specific to the US and not fit so well within Germany. Both the left and the right seem to have a hard time thinking for themselves. And of course, you can also say our geopolitics is, of course, completely. I mean, we are with our ass in the US, right? Take the German support for Israel. There has been a lot of talk about German guilt and so on, but honestly, Germans don't feel guilty. Um, I mean, I'm not saying that our specific past with the Jews does not play a large role also, but a very large role is simply that the US supports Israel, and so we must also support Israel. I mean, things would probably be very different if the US were to abandon Israel. So really, the Germans to this day have this tendency to not do anything of their own, to not have the courage or the originality to do anything of their own, but to just copy the cultural hegemon, be it the US or be it in Kant's time, France. So it's always a two-edged sword. Once again, your very strength can also be your weakness. But I find these, let's say, musings of Kant about Germany being the country of world citizens, of cosmopolitans, Germany being the country that is more open than others to foreign influences and that therefore can be enriched by other countries, other cultures, other ways of thinking, can take up these influences and then combine them, think them through the end. Because if you go with that, if you agree with Kant that this is the German national character, then of course that would mean that the nationalists, the Nazis, the people obsessed with German pride or whatever, that they are the most un-German people you could think of. That they are doing something that is not just irrational and should not be done in any country, but that runs counter to the German being, to the German culture, which of course would make them traitors and would make them, no matter what they may claim to be, people that actually despise the German nature and the German culture. And this is something that here within Germany, I think cannot be repeated often enough. Even if it were not true, we should still repeat it, that German nationalists, German Nazis are the true traitors, the true un-Germans, simply because it annoys them. It annoys the hell out of them. And that alone, I think, because it's a way to troll them, is a good reason to agree with Kant. That to be a true German, you mustn't be obsessed with being a German, you must rather be a citizen of the world. But of course, this goes specifically towards the Germans, but anyone, no matter from what nation, should of course be a world citizen and have this cosmopolitan attitude. And since this attitude is mostly about caring about justice, about perpetual peace between nations, I now, in the next few lectures, want to discuss what Kant has to say about international law, as it is called nowadays, or the right of nations, as he would call it, and what he has to say about how we can reach that goal of perpetual peace on earth. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenk Kubilay Altu, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.